September 1st, 1939. 4:45 a.m. A German battleship fires its guns at a Polish fort. World War II has begun. 6 years later, 2 entire cities will be vaporized by atomic bombs, 50 million people will be dead. Europe will be in ruins, and the world will never be the same. But here's the thing, this didn't have to happen. 20 years earlier, World War I had ended with everyone saying, never again. The League of Nations was created to prevent future wars. Treaties were signed. Borders were redrawn. Everyone went home thinking they'd solved war forever. So what went wrong? How did we go from the war to end all wars to an even bigger, more destructive war just 2 decades later? The answer involves an angry art school reject with a weird mustache, a bald Italian who thought he was Julius Caesar, Japan deciding it wanted to own half of Asia, France building a massive wall that didn't work, Britain trying to make friends with Hitler, awkward, and America showing up late to both world wars like it's a habit. This is World War II, the entire thing. Simplified. We're going to cover 6 years of global conflict in under 30 minutes. Every major battle, every turning point, every wait, they did what moment. No fluff, no boring dates you'll forget immediately. Just the story of how the world caught fire and how it was eventually put out. Let's go. Act 1. How did we get here? The angry men. After World War I ended in 1918, 3 countries felt particularly screwed over: Germany, Italy, and Japan. Germany had been absolutely humiliated by the Treaty of Versailles. They lost territory, had to pay massive reparations they couldn't afford, were limited to a tiny army, and basically had to apologize for existing. Germans were furious. Italy had been on the winning side, but felt cheated because they didn't get as much territory as they'd been promised. They'd lost hundreds of thousands of men for basically nothing. Japan had also been on the winning side, but Western powers kept pushing them around, limiting their expansion and treating them like a second-class nation despite their growing military strength. Into this mix of resentment walked 3 men who said, "I can fix this!" Mussolini, the guy who peaked early. Benito Mussolini was a former socialist who decided socialism was boring and invented something new, fascism. His pitch was simple. Let's make Italy great again, like Roman Empire great. In 1922, he basically told the Italian king, "Make me prime minister, or my fascist army will make me prime minister." The king looked at Mussolini's army and said, "Fair point," and gave him the job. Mussolini became Europe's first fascist dictator. He strutted around shirtless, gave dramatic speeches, and made the trains run on time, allegedly. Italy loved him. For now. Hitler. The art school reject. Adolf Hitler was a failed artist who fought in World War I and was absolutely obsessed with Germany. When Germany lost the war, he took it very personally. In 1923, he tried to overthrow the German government in Munich. It failed spectacularly, and he got arrested. But in prison, he wrote a book about his plans, and when he got out, his popularity exploded. By 1933, he was appointed Chancellor of Germany. He immediately started dismantling democracy, establishing a dictatorship, and blaming all of Germany's problems on Jewish people and other minorities. His plan was simple: make Germany powerful again, take over Europe, create living space for Germans, and establish a racially pure empire that would last 1,000 years. Spoiler alert, it lasted 12 years and ended with him shooting himself in a bunker. Japan, the empire nobody saw coming. Japan had been isolated from the world for over 200 years. Then in 1853, America showed up with warships and said, "Open your borders and trade with us, or else." Japan decided the best way to avoid being colonized was to become colonizers themselves. They built a modern military, industrialized rapidly, and started taking over their neighbors. By the 1930s, Japan controlled Korea and parts of China. They believed they were racially superior and had a divine right to rule Asia. They weren't asking permission anymore. The stages are set. So by the mid-1930s, you had Nazi Germany violating the Treaty of Versailles, rebuilding its military and eyeing its neighbors, fascist Italy invading Ethiopia, with bows and arrows defending against tanks. Yes, really. Japan invading China and committing horrific atrocities. The 3 countries all felt like victims, all believed they deserved more territory, all thought they were superior to everyone else, and all had militaristic dictatorships willing to use force. In 1936, Germany and Italy became buddies and signed agreements. In 1940, Japan joined them, forming the Axis powers. Meanwhile, Britain and France watched nervously and tried a strategy called appeasement. Appeasement, the worst strategy ever. Appeasement worked like this. Hitler, I want that thing. Britain and France, you can't have that thing. Hitler, takes the thing anyway. Britain and France. Okay, fine, but no more things. Hitler, I want that thing. Britain and France. Okay, fine, but this time we really mean no more. In 1938, Hitler annexed Austria. Britain and France did nothing. Then Hitler demanded the Sudetenland, part of Czechoslovakia. Britain and France held a meeting and gave it to him, making him promise not to invade the rest of Czechoslovakia. 6 months later, Hitler invaded the rest of Czechoslovakia. Britain and France, you lied to us. Hitler, what did you expect? I'm Hitler. Finally, Britain and France said, okay, if you invade Poland, that's war. Hitler invaded Poland anyway. World War II had begun. Poland gets crushed. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland from the west. 2 weeks later, the Soviet Union invaded from the east. They'd secretly agreed to split Poland between them. Poland fought hard, but they were caught between two giants. Within a month, Poland was gone. Britain and France declared war on Germany. Then everyone just sat around. This period was called the Phony War because nobody was actually fighting. France launched a tiny invasion into Germany, then turned around and went home. France, the country that gave up. France had built an impressive line of fortifications along the German border called the Maginot Line. The problem? It didn't extend all the way to the English Channel. In May 1940, Germany went around it. They smashed through Belgium and the Netherlands using Blitzkrieg, lightning war, fast-moving tanks, aircraft, and coordinated attacks. Then they did something brilliant and insane. They sent 50 divisions through the Ardennes forest, which France thought was impassable. The Germans encircled the British and French armies, trapping them against the coast at Dunkirk. The British managed a desperate evacuation, with civilian boats crossing the channel to rescue their soldiers. Then, Germany swept through France and took Paris. France surrendered in 6 weeks. Let that sink in. France, the country that fought Germany to a standstill for 4 years in World War I, fell in 6 weeks. Hitler was thrilled. He literally danced a little jig at the signing of the French surrender. Britain stands alone. With France gone, Hitler expected Britain to surrender too. But Britain had a new Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, whose approach to Hitler was absolutely not. Hitler needed to invade Britain, but first he needed air superiority. The Luftwaffe, German Air Force, began bombing Britain in what became known as the Battle of Britain. German bombers attacked British airfields and ports. The outnumbered Royal Air Force fought desperately to defend their homeland. Then Churchill ordered a small bombing raid on Berlin. It barely did any damage, but Hitler was furious. He ordered the Luftwaffe to switch from military targets to bombing London. This was a huge mistake. It gave the RAF time to recover. British civilians endured months of bombing. Children were evacuated to the countryside. Families spent nights in air raid shelters. But morale held. Finally, the RAF won air superiority. Hitler had to cancel the invasion. Britain survived. Mussolini's embarrassing adventures. Meanwhile, Mussolini was watching Hitler's success and thinking, I want some of that. He invaded Greece. It went terribly. The Greeks pushed Italy back into Albania. He invaded Egypt from Libya. The British pushed him back into Libya. Italy was getting beaten by everyone. Hitler had to keep sending German troops to bail Mussolini out. Churchill started calling Italy Europe's soft underbelly. He wasn't compliment them. Operation Barbarossa, Hitler's biggest mistake. In June 1941, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. 3 million German troops attacked along a massive front. It was the largest invasion in history. At first, it went brilliantly. The Germans encircled and captured hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers. They advanced hundreds of miles. Leningrad was besieged. They reached the outskirts of Moscow. Then winter came. Hitler hadn't given his troops winter clothing because he thought he'd win before winter. Temperatures dropped to 40 degrees, oil froze in vehicles, soldiers froze to death. Stalin brought in troops from Siberia who were trained to fight in extreme cold. The Germans were pushed back. Hitler's commanders said, "Can we please retreat and wait for spring?" Hitler said, "No, keep going." It was the beginning of the end for Germany. The Eastern Front would consume millions of lives and become the deadliest theater of the war. Pearl Harbor, America enters the war. On December 7, 1941, Japan launched a surprise attack on the American naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. They destroyed or damaged 8 battleships, killed over 2,400 Americans, and brought the United States into the war. Japan thought destroying the Pacific Fleet would give them time to conquer Southeast Asia before America could respond. They were partially right. They did conquer a massive amount of territory quickly, but they made a critical mistake. They didn't destroy Pearl Harbor's fuel storage, repair facilities, or submarine base. The Pacific Fleet would be back up and running within months. Also, they woke up a sleeping giant with massive industrial capacity that was about to build so many ships, planes, and tanks that Japan would never recover. The tide turns, 1942-1943. Stalingrad, the bloodiest battle. 23. Stalingrad, the bloodiest battle. In 1942, Hitler decided to focus on the southern Soviet Union to capture oil fields. To do that, he needed to take the city of Stalingrad. The battle lasted 5 months. The fighting was street by street, building by building, room by room. Soldiers fought with rifles, grenades, knives, and sometimes just fists. While Germany was focused on Stalingrad, Stalin gathered forces around the city and launched a massive counterattack. He encircled the German Sixth Army, the same tactic Germany had used so effectively in France. Hitler's generals said, "Let them retreat." Hitler said, "No, they stay." The entire Sixth Army was trapped. In February 1943, they surrendered. Over 90,000 German soldiers were captured. Most would never return home. It was Germany's first major defeat. The Soviet Union began pushing westward and wouldn't stop until they reached Berlin. North Africa, Rommel versus Montgomery. In North Africa, German General Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, was pushing British forces around with his tank divisions. But at the Battle of El Alamein in late 1942, British General Montgomery stopped him. Then American and British forces landed in Morocco and Algeria, trapping the Germans between two armies. By May 1943, the Axis was pushed completely out of Africa. Churchill was right. Italy really was the soft underbelly. The Allies invaded Sicily, then mainland Italy. Mussolini gets fired. With Allied bombs falling on Rome and troops advancing through Italy, the Italian people decided they were done with Mussolini. His own fascist Grand Council voted him out. He was arrested. Italy immediately began negotiating surrender. Hitler, seeing this coming, had already sent German troops into northern Italy. They disarmed Italian forces and took control. Italy became a battleground between the Allies pushing north and Germans defending. Mussolini was later rescued by German commandos and set up as a puppet leader in northern Italy. But his days were numbered. The Pacific, island hopping. In the Pacific, the United States adopted an island hopping strategy, capturing strategic islands and bypassing heavily defended ones, getting closer and closer to Japan. Every island was a brutal fight. The Japanese believed surrender was the ultimate dishonor, so they fought to the death. American casualties were horrific. At Midway in June 1942, the U.S. Navy destroyed 4 Japanese aircraft carriers. Japan's Navy never recovered. At Guadalcanal, American forces fought for 6 months in jungle warfare. Slowly, painfully, America was winning. The bombing begins. By 1943, the Allies had air superiority over Germany. British and American bombers began devastating German cities. Firebombing campaigns created firestorms that killed tens of thousands. Hamburg, Dresden, Berlin. German cities were reduced to rubble. The goal was to destroy German industrial capacity and break civilian morale. It succeeded at the first goal. But German morale held longer than expected. Act 4, The Endgame, 1944-1945. D-Day. The invasion nobody thought would work by 1944, the Allies were ready to invade France. Over 1 million troops had gathered in England. Thousands of ships and aircraft were prepared. The Germans knew the invasion was coming, but they didn't know where. The Allies used elaborate deception to make them think it would land at Calais. On June 6, 1944, D-Day, the invasion hit Normandy instead. Paratroopers dropped behind enemy lines to capture bridges and disrupt defenses. Naval bombardment pounded German fortifications. Then at dawn, the landing craft hit the beaches. 5 beaches: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. Omaha Beach was a bloodbath. German machine guns cut down American soldiers as they ran across the beach. But they kept coming. By the end of the day, the Allies had a foothold. By the end of the month, they'd broken out and were racing across France. Paris was liberated in August 1944. The crowd went absolutely insane. The Battle of the Bulge, Hitler's last gamble. In December 1944, Hitler launched a surprise counterattack through the Ardennes. Yes, again. He wanted to split the Allied armies and recapture the port of Antwerp. It was a desperate gamble using Germany's last reserves. At first, it worked. The Germans created a large bulge in the Allied lines and trapped American forces at Bastogne. The Germans sent a message: "Surrender or be annihilated." The American commander replied with one word: "Nuts." General Patton's forces broke through and relieved Bastogne. The German attack collapsed. Hitler had used up his last strength for nothing. The Soviet steamroller. While the Western Allies were in France, the Soviet Union was crushing Germany from the east. They pushed through Poland. They liberated concentration camps and saw the full horror of the Holocaust. They kept advancing. By April 1945, Soviet forces reached Berlin. Hitler, hiding in his bunker, realized it was over. On April 30th, he shot himself. Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945. Europe was free, the Pacific endgame. Japan was still fighting. American forces captured Iwo Jima and Okinawa in brutal battles. Kamikaze pilots crashed their planes into American ships. Firebombing campaigns destroyed Japanese cities. Tokyo was hit so hard that over 100,000 people died in a single night. But Japan wouldn't surrender. Their military code said dying in battle was honorable, surrender was shameful. The Allies faced a terrible choice: invade the Japanese mainland, which would cost millions of lives on both sides, or use a new weapon that had been secretly developed. On August 6, 1945, an atomic bomb destroyed Hiroshima. On August 9th, another destroyed Nagasaki. The Japanese emperor, speaking publicly for the first time ever, announced that the war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. Translation: we surrender. On September 2, 1945, Japan signed the surrender documents. World War II was over. Epilogue: what it all meant. The cost: 50 to 85 million people died. The exact number is unknown because the scale was so massive that counting became impossible. The Soviet Union lost 27 million people, more than every other country combined. 6 million Jewish people were murdered in the Holocaust, along with millions of others the Nazis deemed undesirable. Entire cities were erased, economies collapsed, families were destroyed. The aftermath. Germany was divided between the Allies. East Germany became communist under Soviet control. West Germany became democratic. Japan was occupied by America. Emperor Hirohito kept his position, but MacArthur made sure everyone understood he wasn't divine. Europe was in ruins. America and the Soviet Union emerged as superpowers, and the tension between these two superpowers, capitalism versus communism, democracy versus totalitarianism, would create the Cold War. The world had learned that appeasement doesn't work, that fascism must be confronted, that freedom isn't free. The lessons. World War II showed humanity at its worst: genocide, total war, atomic weapons. But also at its best: resistance fighters risking their lives, soldiers sacrificing for others, ordinary people enduring unimaginable hardship. It showed what happens when we let anger and resentment fester, when we scapegoat minorities, when we allow authoritarian leaders to seize power. It showed that democracies, despite being messy and slow, can unite against evil when necessary, and it showed that wars don't really end. They just create the conditions for the next conflict. Final thought: 6 years. 50 million dead, the entire world at war. It started because 3 angry men convinced their nations that violence was the answer. It ended with cities vaporized and a generation traumatized. The veterans who came home said, "Never again." But here's the thing. Never again requires vigilance. It requires learning from history. It requires recognizing the warning signs before it's too late. World War II didn't have to happen. Let's make sure World War III never does.